Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for our new Facebook Live. We've been a little bit in and out this summer, as I'm sure most of you have, but we're very excited to kind of get back into the swing of things for the school year and to start doing some more Facebook Lives again with you. So today we are with two of our, partners or people we work with at Winston Preparatory School. And Winston Prep is an innovative private day school for students up to 12th grade with learning disabilities such as dyslexia, nonverbal learning disabilities, and then executive functioning difficulties. They have 6 campuses, including 2 in New York City, 1 in Whippany, New Jersey, 1 in Norwalk, Connecticut, and then Dix Hills, Long Island. And they just opened up a school this year in Marin County, California. So they are now bi-coastal, which is really exciting. I know they've been excited about that. And they also just recently launched a fully online school for students who are not close enough to one of those existing campuses. Winston Prep's unique model of education for the individual provides intense skill remediation grounded in research, while also encouraging students to build independence, resilience, responsibility, self-awareness, and then also self-advocacy, which we've talked about a lot on a bunch of our different Facebook Lives. They do this through a process that understands each student, individualizes a program to meet their specific needs, and continuously refines that program based on their individual progress throughout the year while building a powerful sense of community. So today we have Elizabeth Mendelssohn, who is the Winston Innovation Lab Director and COO for the Winston Prep School. We also have Michele Heimbauer. She's the Associate Director of the Winston Innovation Lab for the Winston Prep School. Elizabeth has a background as a reading specialist, and Michele is an SLP, which is a speech and language pathologist. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Both have worked with a diverse population of students over the last 20 years as administrators, specialists, and teachers, and they're frequent presenters and faculty trainers for professionals sharing their work of linking science, research, and understanding of students with learning disabilities. So we're very excited to have both of them here. The NVLD project has actually been working with Winston Prep for about the 6 years on various projects, everything from our annual conferences that we've had at Columbia University, which you can find more information about on our website. We also did a workshop at the LDA conference last year, I believe, with one of our researchers at Columbia that went over really well, had a lot of people at our LDA conference. And then most recently, we worked with Michele on our educational presentation, which is the slideshow that we put out last spring. I think it was spring. For parents and teachers and educators to share with everyone in their schools to help better understand their students with NVLD. So today they're going to talk about the transition back into the school year during the pandemic, specifically for children and students with nonverbal learning disability and kind of what that school year might look like, what to expect, challenges, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to turn this over to Michele and Elizabeth, and I will be back on in just a little bit. And if you have any questions during any of this, please, as always, feel free to submit those into the comments, and then towards the end, we'll address those comments and questions and see if we can't get you some more information on what y'all are looking for. All right, over to you guys.
Thanks, Samantha. Michele and I are both really excited to be here with you this afternoon. The NVLD project is near and dear to our hearts because we do have the opportunity to work with a plethora of students that have nonverbal learning disorders, and the work with the NVLD project is just really helping to get the word out, which really is what makes a difference for these students. So we just want to thank the NVLD project and Samantha and Paula and Laura for continuing to be so supportive. Today we're here, we're just going to give an overview of kind of the considerations as our students with nonverbal learning disorders are returning to school during this pandemic or returning to remote learning. And then Michele will give us some parent tips and ideas on how to support your students, your children at home. As Samantha was talking about in our intro, the way in which we really look at our students is making sure that we have a deep understanding of each individual and their specific set of strengths and weaknesses. And I think it's ever more important to develop that understanding before we dive into programming in these times. So for those of you that are working with educators, like-minded educators who are really in tune with that deep understanding, you definitely have a leg up. But if you're not, as a parent, you want to really figure out what is your child's set of strengths and weaknesses. Who can you go to help you figure that out so that you can better advocate for your student, your child, in whatever setting that they're in. So that profile can look so different for so many different students with nonverbal learning disorders, as we know. So that's why it's really important that many people say you've met one NVLD student, you've met one NVLD student. So that's really how we look at it. And then we take that unique and different understanding and figure out how that manifests in the classroom or in the remote learning world and design a program around that. I think it's really important to keep that in the back of your mind. So these times are very challenging for adults, students, toddlers, pretty much everyone. I think there's particular difficulty for our students with nonverbal learning disorders, and that's why it's really important to think about them. When we were talking to Samantha about how we want to go about this, Michelle and I felt very strongly about focusing particularly on the students with nonverbal learning disorder instead of learning disabilities across the spectrum, because at these times we want to make sure that we're really addressing each student's needs. So NVLD Project has lots of resources up on their website in terms of what a nonverbal learning disorder is. When we're thinking about it and talking about it, we want to think about that these students have a core deficit in really recognizing patterns, that abstract higher order reasoning, math concepts, problem solving, the executive functions. That's really the types of areas where we're seeing difficulties, core deficit areas. And then higher strengths, particularly in that rote memory. So recalling details and facts as opposed to seeing the main idea. Being able to decode really well, break apart the words and read them, but not necessarily being able to infer the meaning of a passage or make connections between them. So right off the bat, you can see kind of all of the areas in school and in life that are impacted with these deficits. So we're thinking about the deficits in the areas impacted are problem solving, academic, social communication, management and organization, self-advocacy, we love that one, self-regulation. So it's really an all-encompassing school and social life challenges. So as I said, now we're in this place where everything is a novel situation. And that is one of the areas where our NVLD students really struggle the most. These new situations where they haven't had the opportunity to learn the pattern and kind of ingrain that. They're being asked to figure out these new patterns, and that's really setting them apart in terms of how much they're comprehending and how much that they can get involved. Both our in-person and our remote learning have some specific challenges. Interestingly, or not interestingly, but not surprisingly, we found that our students with nonverbal learning disorders really succeeded in the spring in remote learning when we just looked at consumption of general knowledge and recall of details and facts, that they could really use those strengths in the remote setting, because most of the time, not at Winston's, but at more mainstream settings, they took out all the difficulty. There was no need for interaction. There was no kind of social communication background noise. That it really, those remote programs really focused a lot on academics. We are firm believers in skill remediation and remediating the areas of greatest need for our students. So we want to make sure that we and all the educators out there are not just getting our nonverbal our NVLD students through the curriculum during these times, but are still trying to work on social communication, self-advocacy, resiliency, problem solving, all these core areas. We know that our students can learn their math facts and they can read on the 10th grade level, but understand on the 3rd grade level. So we've got to make sure that we're really giving them the education and not letting this lack of personal interaction pull them back further in these core areas that they need to be in. The in-person learning brings about a lot of challenges as well that we have to be considering. The masks is one of the biggest. You know, we are really encouraging any service provider, parents, whomever is interacting with the students, to be wearing clear masks so that they can see facial expressions. They continue to learn and view how that interaction is happening. The idea of being behind the mask can really feel somewhat settling to an NVLD student, that they don't have to figure out what this person's telling us, but at the same time, it's not really getting them anywhere. On the flip side, it can be very discerning that, you know, everyone's behind a mask and it's new and it's novel. So that's a really important one. And then getting that social interaction. How can we do that in this new pandemic setting? And Michele and I and other educators and researchers in the field have really been focusing in on that. How do we interact with our students in a way that is rich and valuable while staying 6 feet apart and wearing masks? So we're really redoing a lot of the way in which we're programming. And that to me is probably one of the biggest considerations that we need to think about as educators, as parents, as specialist providers, whomever we are, is how are we going to change the way in which we are teaching, because we are changing, that we can't use the same techniques that we were using before. We've got to figure out how they're going to work either on the screen or with the distance. So that's a big consideration to talk to your schools, your service providers kind of about. The other piece of it is really being able to support and push and emulate high expectations when you're not in that intimate setting. So that's something that we really are working on as well. How do we develop deep rapport and relationships, whether on the screen or 6 feet apart? So those are all really kind of a broad spectrum of the difficulties that we're looking at, kind of this play on strengths. And then Michele's going to dive into a few ways that parents can support. And then we're really here for your questions.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. So we really want to support our children with that flexibility piece, especially in these times. And that goes hand in hand with the resilience. So as parents, we really want to model positive coping skills that we have and that we could share with our students. So share your past setbacks, share your frustration or confusion about current situations, and talk about how you cope with those pieces of life. You know, we really want to make it known that everybody struggles, everybody encounters struggles, and it's not about keeping our children kind of safe and secure and protected against those struggles, but really teaching them and supporting them through the struggles so that they start acquiring positive coping strategies. Part of the resilience also is establishing and maintaining those social connections. So we really, again, like Elizabeth said, we want to make time and effort towards creating those opportunities for socialization, even if it's just virtual. You know, research shows over and over again that to be successful and happy and satisfied, you really need that at least one person that you have a strong connection with, and it could be a friend or a family member. But we want to really support our children to reach out to people. So, you know, reach out to grandma when something great happens, or you've learned something interesting, or reach out to a friend when you're struggling with something or not, you know, having a rough day. So really practicing to reach out and making those connections to further solidify those friendships. And that social communication, maintaining and deepening those social connections is really important. And as parents, it can be as simple as, just watching TV with them at night, picking a show and really thinking about the relationships of the characters, hitting pause. These days, everything's digital. So you just pause it and talk about, what just happened. How do we know how they're feeling? Read their face, read the tone, read the context, predict what they're gonna do or say next. So just really focusing on that social emotional learning in the social realm really helps our NVLD students. And also deepening conversation skills, that also helps solidify and maintain and deepen friendships. You can at dinner time ask a would you rather kind of question. If you could choose, would you rather live in a treehouse or a boathouse? And if they said treehouse, really take that response and elaborate and expand and use kind of visual imagery to really practice those visual skills with our NVLD students, so children. So like, what would it look like? How would you furnish it? How big would it be? Where would it be? How high would it be if it was a treehouse? How would you get the supplies up there? So really teaching them how to expand on their ideas and also deepen conversation, and also encourage them to ask you what you would prefer. That reciprocal communication is key to maintaining and building relationships. Another huge component of successful learning at home, whether it's a hybrid model that you're in or fully remote, or even if they're in class and they're coming home and doing homework, really that management and organization and self-regulation piece. So our NVLD students really benefit from having things scheduled. And it's not just about the academic schedule, when your classes are, but also scheduling in those phone calls with friends and family, scheduling in non-screen activities for families. So, Thursday afternoon, we're gonna go for a walk in the park. So really scheduling the routine so that they can see kind of how it's laid out, what to expect, which is really important for these kids, and kind of how to plan. And that time piece too is also really just understanding the concept of time, how long things take. A lot of our NVLD students get overwhelmed by the amount of homework that they're given, but then when they really get it, it's not that long. So really working on looking at the time, guessing how much time things take, and then seeing how long they do take is helpful. And involve them in managing the family calendar, involve them in food shopping, involve them in meal planning, so that they start learning how to organize their time and manage tasks and learn how long things take. And then self-regulation also, it goes beyond, I'm sure a lot of you have heard already, organize a dedicated learning space. Schedule regular breaks, schedule time to exercise, encourage regular sleep schedules, limit distractions, even use mindfulness apps to kind of focus them in on the task that they're coming into. But another good way to encourage self-regulation for our students is really what's called thoughtful cueing. So before something happens, so say, before the school week starts, think about the routine, think about the schedule, think about the plan, and talk about, what are some possible hiccups? what could possibly go wrong, and rate them on a scale. Really think about, how big is this problem going to be? Is it a 1 where it's not that big a deal, or is it a 5 where I'm really going to need some help? And then think about possible solutions, so that they're going in not blind. So if something does go wrong, they have a plan. And also reflect on those moments too. So if the internet goes out, what to do, or what they did, what worked, what didn't, and have them rate how big the problem was in the end afterwards, to see kind of what they can handle. And then it's great to keep track of those little problems along the way, and how it was handled, and noting that they survived and they handled it, and then keeping that record of the problems that they faced and the challenges that they overcame really ties into that resilience piece, but also that problem solving piece and self-advocacy of I don't always have to ask for help, that you're empowering them to have the confidence that they can manage a lot as well. And that brings me to more of that problem solving piece. Whether it's a problem with the Google Classroom, or if you're on Google Meets or Zoom, they're gonna come into challenges, or if they're doing their homework, if they ask something like, I need help, I don't get this math problem. Rather than just doing it for them, really ask them, how do you help yourself? Do you have a model to look back at, or do you have notes that you can look back at? Are there strategies? What have you not tried? So asking probing questions like that to encourage them to help themselves first is really helpful. If they ask something like, is this right? I know a lot of our students don't like to turn things in if they're not sure that they're right. You can turn it back on them. Well, what evidence do you have that it is right? Can you prove it to me? Talk it through. Because we don't want their automatic response to be, I need help from a teacher, or I need help from a parent. We want to, again, empower them with the confidence that they can solve problems. For that advocacy piece, a small tip that's helpful is just to create like a cue card, an advocacy card, just with a little reminder. Did you try to solve the problem on your own? And if so, and they need to reach out, just list maybe 3 people. So a friend in class, and then how they should reach out to them. So a friend, you would text maybe, or a teacher, you would email, or grandpa. My daughter just had this, she's just starting to take physics, and grandpa's an engineer. So he's on her advocacy list of who to call. So grandpa, you call, but understanding who to call when, and how to reach out to them is important. And just having that cue, that visual, is helpful reminder that they have avenues to go to explore. Also, even just making sure that they know even how to ask questions during class. If it's a synchronous situation, are they supposed to use the back channel chat? Are they supposed to use the hand raise function? Are they just supposed to unmute and speak up? So really working with the team of teachers that work with your child to figure out kind of what their expectations are is really helpful. And I just said a whole mouthful.
No worries. Okay. Awesome. I'm just making a couple notes really quick. Okay, so a lot of information on both of those. Again, if you're watching and you didn't catch all of it the first time, go back, watch it again. Watch it 3 times, make notes, do whatever you need to do, because there's a lot of good information in there. And as you're both talking, I just kept going back to that educational presentation that we made. That, to me, now more than ever, honestly seems like such a good tool for parents to have, because they've kind of like become the teachers in the last 6 to 8 months, and they really need that information for when it comes to helping their children with school. And so I'm going to link that in the comments here in just a minute. I'm also going to post it as a separate post on Facebook tonight. But we created this, it's a downloadable PDF as a slideshow, but Michele also did audio video with it, with all of this information about nonverbal learning disability in the classroom. And I think I'm looking at this slide that's just talking about overall instructional approaches. And you guys were both just constantly like touching on the approaches that we had in there. And I just think for parents, especially that are finding themselves in the hybrid type classroom situation or even completely virtual, these are just such great general approaches to how to help your children. And I think one of the main themes that we see in a lot of our talks with professionals, and I just was making a note on it with you guys, is there's three main things that I think are always very helpful. And one of them is setting expectations about any situation, any possible situation, and especially now because things are changing now, but like could change again in a month or in the spring semester or next year. And so just setting those expectations of what to expect and then communicating them seems to be a very common, just clear, explicit communication. Again, these are on our instructional approach page as well, but just that communication and then organization. I don't know, those are the three things I just constantly hear and feel like a lot of the pieces fall into. I don't know if you guys want to touch on any of that, but it is something that's in our presentation that we created this past year.
Yeah, I think for both teachers and parents, really focusing and practicing on the expectations because they're so new this year. So practicing physical distancing as you're walking, practice, especially for our NVLD students who have difficulty estimating the distance and where they are in space related to somebody else. So what does that look like? What does that feel like? Really, rehearsing how to kind of go through those motions in the beginning of the year, I think would make it more fluid and easier so that they don't have to think about that and they can focus more on what they're learning and what they're supposed to be doing later on.
Awesome. Another thing that I'm going to link in the comments, you guys, I think Elizabeth, you mentioned the clear masks, right? So the mask, I've seen them out and about, but they're just like clear plastic here and then the cloth on the side. So are all of your teachers using those in the classrooms this year?
Yes, all of our teachers are using the clear masks unless there's an extenuating circumstance. But yeah, some of them are using the ones that are clear with the cloth on the sides, and so others are just using the completely clear. They have
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll see if I can find a couple of those and just like link them in the comment section, which is interesting because the last Facebook Live we did was with 3 of our ambassadors, so our adult ambassadors. And it's so funny to hear this because they were actually like, we like it, not seeing anyone's facial expressions, and they felt like it was a level playing field because no one was seeing, and I'm like super facial expressive, no one was seeing those facial expressions. They felt like it was like more of a level playing field as far as everyone else was having to like understand kind of what they felt on a daily basis. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and Samantha, it's an important thing or concept to understand because it does totally level the playing field. It also makes you realize how important it is to really focus on that remediation piece. That, yeah, it would be easy if everyone just wore face masks because then our students with NVLD wouldn't have to interpret and inference what people were thinking or what their facial expressions were saying. And that is the tendency. It is why, again, some NVLD students really seemingly were successful during remote learning because a lot of that was taken out. So I think it's always important to think about your goal, because sometimes, if you're headed to a crowd of some sort with your student with your child in these times, they're masked, and that's a regular mask. Everyone's wearing completely cloth masks. That's leveling the field. That's bringing their anxiety down. That's not a time when we would want to see a bunch of clear masks. When we're in the one-on-one conversations with our educators or the small class groupings, that's where we want to see clear masks. We don't want to put our children in situations that are so novel and overwhelming that it's kind of this unlevel playing field. But when we can have those opportunities to really sink in and help remediate, that's when I would promote a clear mask. But I think it's really important, and it highlights making sure you know the purpose of what you're doing and why you're doing it. That we don't want educators or service providers just doing clear masks because that's what they saw. We want them to think about, why am I using a clear mask? Where am I using a clear mask? What's my goal here?
Very cool. That's good feedback. Thank you. I just, the contrast in those two Facebook Lives was really interesting. So I'm trying to pull up some of our questions on Facebook, but one time when I did this, I actually kicked us off of Facebook Live. So I'm trying not to do that this time. So give me just a second, because I know that we have some good ones on here. Okay, let's try this again. So I can see 4 questions right now. Paula, if you're watching, if you can text me if I'm missing any, that would be great. But so the first one says, thank you for presenting. And they want to know if there's any specific accommodations that they should ask for during an IEP. I know it's a little different because you guys are like a private school that focuses on this, but is there anything you can think of? So I'm going to assume, Lawanda, that you're talking about for a public school. Is there anything you would recommend during those meetings?
Definitely. I mean, and it really varies. There's been a lot of talk about pre-pandemic and post-pandemic IEPs, or maybe we should say pre-pandemic, pandemic, and post-pandemic. So, at this time, a lot of people are calling for additional IEP or PPT meetings, whatever your state calls them, to make modifications in this different world. So that's when you want to be thinking about the purpose of what services are being provided and how they're being provided, and whether that is of value to your student, your child specifically. If I think about pre-pandemic and post-pandemic IEPs, I'm looking for accommodations and services like group social skills, speech and language pathologist meeting with a group so that social interaction piece is there, the pragmatic language. I'm looking for not simple, but repeating, re-explaining directions. Michele, do you have other ones that you would off the top of your head?
Not specifically for IEP, but I do know that according to all the outcome research, the students that are most successful with this hybrid and distance learning are the students that have some sort of facilitator, mentor, counselor who works with them one-to-one, that to help them with that time management piece, the problem solving piece, to make sure that they're engaged and on track. So I don't know if that can be part of the IEP, but I think that's important.
Awesome. Okay, so the same person also said that it appears her child is doing better with virtual learning. Should she consider homeschooling? Now that's like a very specific question to probably her situation, but there may be a lot of parents out there wondering about homeschooling right now too.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And when I think about that, obviously I'm not going to make a direct recommendation because I don't know the scenario, and I'm a firm believer in understanding the student before making any of that. But as a parent, there are things that you would want to consider. It's kind of the accessibility to services. So if you're in a place that really has a good understanding of students with nonverbal learning disorders and is thinking about that as they're designing instruction, then I would push to keep them enrolled in that kind of group, because there is that social component, the focus on higher order comprehension, math concepts, and it's just a rich environment. However, if you're in a place, a school, a district where the services are not there for students with nonverbal learning disorders, I do think that sometimes it is a good idea to consider other opportunities that might not be in the district, in the school. Because you really want someone who understands. Sending a student with a nonverbal learning disorder to a mainstream school that doesn't understand him or her, particularly in the pandemic, might not be the best decision, because again, they're not necessarily hitting that remediation piece. They're really just trying to get that student through that curriculum. So from the sounds of it, it doesn't surprise me that your child with a nonverbal learning disorder did really well in remote. A lot of our mainstream students did really well in remote because we took out some of, if not the biggest, factors that really cause their school problems, which is those executive functioning skills, the social communication, even just navigating from what happens between when they left the house to when they entered the door at school. How many novel situations did they encounter? What has their cognitive power gone to just in those steps? So remote learning for our NVLD students really took out all of the challenges. I don't necessarily think it's the best for forever remediation unless you're working with a specialist.
Awesome. Okay, so let me see. Our next one. So Sarah Jane is just wanting us to share that presentation. I'm going to add that in the comments later. Anne wants to know what age is appropriate to test for NVLD and what type of specialty do I need to look for, which I think we have that information on our website as far as like professionals that you can work with. But if you guys want to talk about like what's a good age for testing and who should be doing the testing, that would be good.
Yeah, I mean, you really want to go to, ideally the list on NVLD project is evaluators that are sensitive and have a good understanding of a nonverbal learning disorder. A lot of times we will see kids coming out of evaluations with multiple diagnoses: reading disorder, math disorder, executive functioning, PDD, OCD, the list kind of goes on because we don't have that NVLD in the DSM yet. There are some evaluators out there that will give that specific diagnosis. So I don't think that there is, you want to look for someone who has experience with NVLD students, or you want to find someone that can help you interpret that. As far as the age, I think the sooner the better, as with any learning disability, early intervention is the best. And there are specific indicators that can be seen at early ages. Byron Rourke was a great kind of researcher and pioneer in the field of NVLD, and he uses this great example of a young toddler looking at this beautiful red vase, and an NVLD student is likely to say, "What's that?" And the parent would say, "Oh, it's a vase, we put flowers in it." And then that student, to him, that's a vase and you put flowers in it, and that's what they've learned. As opposed to another toddler who might say, "That's a really cool looking thing. It's red, shiny. I'm gonna go over to it," and they waddle over to it and they knock it down. So then their mom or whomever gets frustrated, they broke the vase, but that child just learned that vases break. When they break, the mom gets mad. It's called a vase. It can hold things. So that kind of exploratory learning, and you can see that very early on. So I think that getting evaluated by the right professional early is always the best.
Okay. And then speaking of that last comment, because you mentioned the DSM, we did have a comment from Jennifer about when NVLD will be considered for the DSM again. If you go to our website and go to what we do on that page, it talks about all the research we're working on. It addresses the proposal for the DSM that we've been working on, which has been discussed at our last 2 conferences we've had up at Columbia. It's also going to be including a name change. We're trying to define NVLD. We're getting, it's a process. It's not super fast. I think one of the good things is the DSM is now digital. So it's, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe my understanding is that it's easier to update ongoing versus having to submit only when the book is reprinted, but it's a years long process. We've been working on it for 4 or 5 years. You have to have the research to kind of back that up as far as what you're putting in it. You want to make sure that when you do submit it, you have everything exactly how you need it so that it's got the best shot at being accepted. So it is something we're working on. It is ongoing. You can read about it on our website. Jennifer, I'll give that link to you here in just a little bit. She said, in the meantime, a simple way to share the diagnosis with the pros that work with your children. Again, I'm going to share that presentation that we have as well as a lot of resources on our website. Do you guys have resources on the Winston Prep website as well, or is it more just about the school in general? You're muted.
We have a few articles. I'll send the links to you.
Okay, perfect. So we'll share that as well so that everyone's got all that information. Okay. Do people with NVLD have contradicting symptoms of NVLD? So example, my daughter is very perceptive of people, but per her diagnosis with NVLD, she should have trouble in that area.
So this is something that we've kind of dove into quite a lot. Michele, do you want to talk about it a little bit, or? Okay. So as I said at the onset, we have a very large population of students with nonverbal learning disorders that we work with. At the first time that we kind of took an in-depth study, we had about 150 students that we looked at. And it's why I confidently say that when you've met one NVLD student, you've met one NVLD student. And we looked at our NVLD students and we looked at their pattern of strengths and weaknesses, particularly the cognitive and academic realms. As well as the social communication. And we saw patterns. And while the majority of our students with a nonverbal learning disorder had kind of the 5 core deficit areas, which we consider visual spatial, math concepts, higher order comprehension, executive functioning, social communication, there was some variance that we would find students that had well-developed higher order comprehension skills, which sounds like a little bit about what you're saying about your daughter, that she's able to perceive and probably infer, which is not necessarily the textbook definition of NVLD. So that doesn't surprise me. We saw a lot of variance within that. The core deficit areas that are common throughout really stem from the visual spatial difficulty. And that can manifest in many different ways on many different levels. An NVLD student that has core deficits in all 5 areas can look very different to the child next to them that has those same core deficit areas, but they're on completely different functioning levels. So that doesn't surprise me, but it's good to dive in and see specifically what led to her strengths there. Are there particular tasks that she was asked to complete? Maybe the block design or some kind of cognitive test that allows you to understand more deeply why there is that strength, and then how teachers and parents can use that strength to build up those core deficits.
And I think if you go back and look at our last Facebook Live, so it's on Facebook right now. I don't know that I've had a chance to put it on YouTube or the website, but we talked with our 3 ambassadors. They were also discussing how they were each very different and what their strengths and weaknesses were as well, and where they really saw NVLD fit the like criteria and the definition versus where they actually had more strengths on certain aspects of it as well. So I think that that's a good Facebook Live to refer to.
And just as a follow-up there, because it's something we haven't really talked about that I do think is important, both Michele and I mentioned it in a cursory manner, is really that many of our children with nonverbal learning disorders, they really have this difficulty recognizing patterns. And the more that we can help them understand the pattern, the better we're equipping them to succeed in the future. So I like to use the example of the school cafeteria. The school cafeteria can be a very overwhelming place pre-pandemic. Then having a student walk in and figure out, who am I going to sit with? Where are my friends? What's happening? It's very overwhelming and can cause a complete shutdown. So it's finding those opportunities to say, okay, Samantha, step one, you walk in. Step two, you can see where everybody's seating. Determine who you're looking for before you walk in, and really make a pattern, make a process so that each student kind of internalizes that pattern, and then they're better able the next time they walk into a cafeteria. And then the goal is the next time they walk into a shopping mall, that they can use the same technique. So helping our children, our students, really recognizing the patterns so that when they're given another novel situation, when they're put into another new situation, they have something to fall back on as they enter in.
Good. Okay. So this next one is, my 13-year-old enjoys spending time with other kids, however, always waits for the other child to initiate that interaction. She wants to know if that's a characteristic of NVLD or just unique to her child. And then any suggestions on ways to help him connect with other kids. He has a hard time figuring out if the kid really likes him unless they're overly like nice and kind to him, which in middle school does not happen.
Well, I wish I had saved my example that I just said for this.
Kind of setting those patterns.
There you go. That's totally typical. So yes, I mean, for a 13-year-old in general, that is pretty, it's common, but particularly our middle school, early high school, really, and beyond, have that difficulty with social initiation. That there is so much, one, that, difficulty kind of taking in the world around them and organizing and creating kind of meaningful patterns so that you can engage. That's a very typical core deficit that we see. So that's totally usual. And I would really say it's practice. And, it sometimes feels funny to like practice interacting, like how do you walk up to someone? What are types of things that you can talk about? But that's really the core area that you want to focus in on remediation. So I would say for your child to talk about that, who in that group do you want to interact with? Do you know anything about them? Next time you see them, find out what their favorite video game is. So then the next time you meet them, you can talk about that video game. So really kind of laying out, they feel very manufactured, but that can bring that internal peace and then help the student, the children, be ready for the next novel situation. So I would just keep encouraging it. I think, as in the example, kind of that overly friendly person, child, those are great people to test it out with. Finding those people, whether they're brothers or sisters or cousins or next door neighbors, that really understand where your child's coming from and are able to help practice in a very real world setting, that it's not just adults and children.
And I think in another Facebook Live, we had a similar question, and I can't remember who it was, but they had recommended just as your child gets older, they're going to develop more interests and hobbies, and to use whatever that interest or hobby is, whether it's a sport or reading or Boy Scouts or anything like that, and then putting them in a group with other children who also enjoy that, because then they have that common ground to connect on versus just focusing on their like personal connection. was one of the suggestions as well. So as they start developing those hobbies and interests, really encouraging that and pursuing something with that as well.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Because just off the bat, I can think of my public library offers like Lego building clubs. So they go in knowing that they have this shared interest. So it's kind of an easier, safer bet that they'll find somebody to connect with. It just kind of gives them a little bit of an edge.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, public libraries have some great programs these days. I think those are all of our comments. We had somebody say that Howard County, not sure what state, but they gave her daughter's teachers one professional day to understand NVLD. One day. The next year, she homeschooled her child. Obviously, one day is probably not enough. It's actually one day maybe more than other districts and schools even consider doing. But yeah, it sounds like she is homeschooling now because they just weren't able to fully understand and help out with her child's needs.
Yeah, when you think about it, we think about dyslexia, which is so well researched and really, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of experts. There's still a lot of misunderstanding, don't get me wrong. But when we think of the field of nonverbal learning disorders, there really isn't a lot out there. So it doesn't surprise us that the majority of folks, starting with the title of the disorder, it's a misnomer that they're nonverbal. But people really don't understand it. It's one of the reasons that we're really committed to working with the NVLD project, because our goal at Winston is not only to provide an excellent education to the 525 students we have in our building, but it's to really look at those students and look at the teachers and follow our students' lives over time so we can figure out what's working with our students, what's not working, what kind of innovative programming we can do, and then getting that out, just like the NVLD project does with all of these Facebook Lives and the informational sheets they're giving out and the presentations, that the more we can all spread the word and the more that all of the parents out there ask the questions, I think that's really what's going to bring this piece of the field of learning disabilities to the top of the list, and that we can get funding for research and we can get a lot of students who aren't getting the services they need. So I encourage all parents to just continue to reach out. Samantha is great about it. Michele and I definitely will keep our eyes on it, but I think knowledge is power, and it really brings a lot of people peace, and we want to just get the word out there and help in any way we can.
I think it's interesting you emphasize a lot when talking about children that may have NVLD or struggle with the symptoms. If you are on our Facebook page, I can't remember if I've added it to the website or not. If I haven't, I'll get it added, but we did just have a prevalence paper come out. Check that out. It seems that it is a little more prevalent than we thought. Well, probably not more than we thought, but more than other people thought that did not deal with this or understand it or anything. So check that out if you haven't already. It's pretty interesting to see. And we had the 2 questions I sent you guys through emails. I can actually send links for stuff that's on the website. Again, one of them is the presentation we already did, but I think our last question for today before we wrap it up, because we're coming up on an hour here. My son started school 3 weeks ago and is already falling behind. He was diagnosed in 3rd grade, got a 504, started doing better, and then they got the 504 plan put into remission. I'm guessing they just pulled the plan at the beginning of 6th grade. So now he's in 10th grade and he's getting very behind again. All the reading and taking notes is difficult. Looking into getting a 504 plan reinstated as soon as we can, but he's very down on himself and he doesn't want the 504 plan because he doesn't want to be a victim. Suspect the disorder has affected him much more than she's aware in many aspects of his life. Just advice on what interventions are most helpful for high school students who have to take a lot of notes and do lots of reading. They need to discuss this with his counselor very soon. So
yeah, the first thing that I would say, particularly for a high schooler, when we look at our students' lives over time, so we look at them 5, 10, 15, 20 years out from graduation, one of the leading factors to their success as an adult is an understanding of themselves. So I think that particularly with our high school students, you know, in this comment, which is not, it's very typical for a high school student not to want to get 504 services or have an IEP, but it's really figuring out how to help him better understand his profile, and that it's not a weakness. He just has difficulty, probably based on the quick analysis, the visual spatial skills, those higher order comprehension, you know, being able to read, take notes, all of these different skills and where he's using these executive functions, that really having a good evaluation and being able to say, you know, here is your pattern of weaknesses, but here's your pattern of strengths, and this is how you can use it, and this is why an IEP would be helpful. You know, having the notes in advance, an outline for where the notes are going, a format, some kind of pre-filled, so that he doesn't have to use as much of that cognitive power in interpreting what he's reading and then putting it into the notes. But him being able to understand that, and Samantha kind of brings it back to that self-advocacy piece, that we know we can't expect our students, our children, to excel if they don't have a true understanding of themselves. And that can be years of work. But I highly, just as I started out with educators needing to have a deep understanding, our children need to have a deep understanding of themselves as well. So that one, they can be open to remediation, and two, that they can know what to ask for, and not just in 10th grade, but when they enter into the job force.
And I think just to add on to that, having taught high school myself, and you know, having been a high schooler, it is hard at that age to kind of really want to take a step back and understand who you are as like a learner and a student and a person. And so just, you know, be patient with him. You know, it's going to be a struggle. It may be rough trying to get him to really accept the things about him, but we've talked in many of our everything, the conferences we've had and all that, it's not always about the weakness. Focus on the strengths. There are so many strengths and so many good, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but like there's so many positive things that NVLD brings that makes these students strong students in their own aspect. And I think that just helping him focus on the positives versus like where he struggles at that age is really going to help with his confidence, which may open him up to the idea of learning more about what he needs as well.
And to just piggyback off of that, I think what's important in this case and with all of your children with NVLD is really focusing on that labeled praise, where you are commending them on processes that they go through when they're successful. So not just saying great job, but you know, I'm really proud of how you handled that challenge, you know, and specifically tell them what they did right, and why they succeeded, because they don't know, they can't see the forest for the trees, you know. So you really need to be explicit in telling them what they're doing well with and why. So really piling on that labeled praise, any chance you get, anytime you catch them doing something fantastic, and really explaining what it is that they're doing so that they build that awareness of, oh, I can do this.
That's great advice. Because then it goes back to the patterns of like, if I do this and this and this, like I'm doing it correctly and people appreciate that, and then I get praised. I think that's really good advice. And I think that's also a great note to end on with the positive vibes. Do you guys have any last words? Anything else that you'd like to say? No?
No, just thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Again, if you're watching and you haven't already submitted a question, again, this will be available on Facebook forever. So leave a comment. We do get notifications. We'll check those. If it's not something that we at the NVLD project can answer, we would be happy to send those to Elizabeth and Michele by email and get you guys some answers. You can always reach us at info@nvld.org. Visit our website, lots of resources on there. I'm going to share the Winston Prep website as well, because they'll have some resources that you guys may need. And then I'm going to go in and send some specific links to our comments that we have stuff that might be helpful as far as resources available, plus our educational presentation that Michele so graciously helped us with over the past year to help you guys transition this school year. So thank you all for joining. It was great to be back on Facebook Live, and I am sure that we will see you all again soon.